So this year I started doing fact-based streams covering tabletop role-playing games. And in the first year of these streams, I'm focused on the beginning, old school tabletop role-playing games. I'm going to tell you about the old school. The old school games have something new school games do not have. And when I say new school, I mean something like 5e Dungeons and Dragons from Wizards of the Coast. Old school has soul. Yeah, 5e does not. Well, what do I mean? Old school focuses on your experience and the feel. Like the actual thing that you're doing. It doesn't just treat the game just purely like a game. It's a mind game. It expects you to think, but it wants you to have an experience in the process. Something new school doesn't seem to understand how to do right, or even how to do at all. You'll notice there might be a lot of combat with your 5e game. Like a lot of combat. You're doing a lot of fighting in your 5e Dungeons and Dragons game. Well, it's not just the new school. You can go back to the majority of the old school tabletop role-playing game players. And they were no different than people that are playing today. They were looking for action. They turned these games into just games and a lot less mind games. They weren't playing it that way. They were playing for the action. Even though the old games were not really suited to that, the majority of the old school were trying to play it that way. Why? The old school was, let's say, starting as an experiment. And the games were initially made for a lot more of a niche audience. People that were deep thinkers. And it was only made for them. And it was made for people that might be like in the wargaming community. People that would invest a lot of their effort and time into what they're doing. People with patience. People that really thought deeply about the hobby that they were in. And the designers thought they were making games for people like that. Patient people who wanted to put a lot of deep thinking into what they were doing. Imagine initially making games for that type of player. That type of gamer. Only to find out, without knowing it right away, that you would eventually draw the vast majority of your people from a completely different group. Right? It wouldn't be them. It would be people that were going to play the game in a much different way and weren't going to make the same effort. Think as deeply about the games. Though you didn't design the games for those kinds of people, the games are initially designed for deeper thinkers. And then what happens? You get a bunch of people out of the majority coming into your hobby, trying to play the games. And some games they like, but they like them in the way that they play them. Not the way they were designed to be played, and the way that they choose to play them. And they look at a lot of other games they try, and they criticize them. See, old school games were made in the mindset by the designers that people were going to spend quite a bit of time playing them, would be very patient, and they would know to appreciate things. You'll hear people from the majority, or even from the new school, well, that game is about survival, it's not about action, it's not about this. And I would tell them, well, when you do your fighting, fight after fight after fight, it can feel repetitive, right, after a while. And everybody who does a lot of action will say, yeah, it's true. You keep doing the fights, and there's a repetitive thing to it. And it's something that doesn't feel too unique or too rare. You're constantly doing combat. You're constantly going after action. Well, I would tell you in an old school game, you might think there's not much action. But when you get to the action in that game, oh wow, it's rare. It's unique, and it feels amazing. Like there's an amazing thing to being patient, to getting to that point. And there's other aspects of the game that if you don't bother buying into them, you can't feel them, you can't appreciate them. But if you're willing to be patient, do social interaction a bit more, really pay attention to other areas, you can actually go into a game and feel intensity that you would think only comes from combat, but here it is. You're just socializing, you're trying to deal with a situation, and man, it feels intense. Especially in a game where danger is real danger. where the chances of you surviving are a lot less. The game is very dangerous in almost every area that has to do with, say, combat or anything like that. It puts you on an edge. Nothing is safe. But that lack of safety creates intensity. The possibility so easily of character death coming your way puts you on an edge. What decision do you make? What do you do? And in that, it is exciting. The other thing is, when you're not just focused on combat, you truly get to take a setting in. You based on the limitations, you'll focus more on other things. So what happens when you're patient? You start actually feeling the setting. It's not generic because you're playing to it, and you're not just trying to play something in some generic way. Like, I could put you down any world, and you could keep going for the action. It can start feeling samey, right? But when you're stuck down to the limitations of the world, and you got to go based on how the society works, how everything else works, you start feeling the setting, right? It's something that will be taken away from you if you don't care too much about all that, but you're focused on action. See, the old games, or the old designers, understood that the experience matters, but a lot of people will hear about these games, and without even playing them, without even initially trying them, they'll think, oh, that doesn't sound appealing at all, right? Or even worse, when we had the majority back in the old school, you would have guys step from that majority and try to run the game. But they run it in a way the designer was not intending. And then you hear complaints. Well, that was generic, that was sort of boring, that game wasn't that good. But I'm like, well, you were running it down here, but the designer has made it for people that are going to put this kind of effort in up here. Now, it's not that the designer hates you. They don't even know you're going to be in the hobby. They don't hate you at all. They think the person, the deep thinker, the hard worker, the faster paced person with a mind for running the game is going to be up here running their game and doing it the way they designed for it to be done. And what they're hoping is if they have that person, the players playing that game will have the experience they intend. But if you're down here not exactly doing what the designer expects, well, what do you think the game turns into? They'll even tell you themselves. It will turn into a generic game. And that will be the complaint you give it. It doesn't exactly feel that great. It's generic. Well, it's generic if you run it without trying too hard. Or if you run it without understanding it. Like, if you run it in a way that where you don't get what you are supposed to be doing with the game, it can feel lackluster. But it is going to feel lackluster because you're not doing what the designer wants. If you do what the designer intends, if you can understand what the designer is after, and you do it right, well, then you get from it what the designer intended it to be. And fair enough, at that point, you still feel the game is there's something wrong. That's fine. But I hear a lot of people out there judge old games in a way it's like, I'm like, oh, you don't like it, right? Well, let me see you run it. Oh, okay, well, dude, you don't like it, but the problem is you're not even running it right. You're not even running it the way it's intended to be ran. So maybe try to run it the way... But then you realize, as you're saying something like that, you realize it's a person that is probably not capable of running it up here. And that's not an insult. And the designer isn't hating on you. They just don't expect the majority that aren't going to try as hard to even be in the hobby. The old games were made for extreme hobbyists. Again, wargamers. Problem is, imagine you start making a game for wargamers, and then less than 10% of the wargaming community crosses over to play these games. And then next thing you know, what surprises you, because you don't expect the majority to be stepping in, because you don't see the majority stepping into wargaming, you do not expect a vast majority of people from a different area to step into your hobby and go, we want to do that. You do? But we never made the game for you. And if you tried to play this game and you don't take it as serious as the wargamer, the game is not designed for your lackluster approach. Right? Your lackluster approach means this game becomes no good to you in many ways. Or it won't live up to what the game designer has intended. But see, the game designer is saying if you play it at a high level and take it serious, for example, Bushido, you'll feel feudal Japan when you play it. With the mystery and fantasy that the designer is intending for you to feel. And for you to feel it, things have to be rare. So, because the game is dangerous, but they want you to rarely run into, say, something like the supernatural. Why rare? So when you finally, like, there's always a creeping hint around the corner that's there, but you never know. You never know when you're really going to run into it. And when you finally do, after, so much into the game, man, when you run into it, because of how dangerous the game is, how easy it is for you to lose your life, or your character's life, it's scary, and it's intense, and you feel it. Now, if the game is not as dangerous, and I just keep throwing supernatural at you, the scary, the intensity, the feel numbs out. It starts going away. The rarity of it, because it's not rare, is gone. The effects that should have on your mind start slipping. But if I tell you what the game is, it can sound lackluster. It's only if I can get you as a player to buy in, try hard, play into the social rules of the game, into the social rules of the world with your character. If you buy in, you go through that. What I can promise you is no matter how lackluster it sounds, your experience will be amazing. As long as you have a game master that is intense on focusing on how run the game properly, and they're constantly on. Like I covered a game last night, Gangbusters, about like the 1920s, gangsters and all this. You're in a sandbox, which is a city, a fictional city, but that city is alive. Well, is it? Is it really alive? Depends on the person running it. It has to constantly be reacting and giving actions constantly. But imagine you meet up with one of the many game masters around from the majority, and they're slow rolling the game. They're sitting there like, yeah, something happens. Okay, like how fast, dude? Like, and they're not even giving energy to the way they run the game. They are sitting back. Oh, this might happen, this might happen. And here's what happens when you get these type of people in the game. A lot of players start thinking that's the norm. They think that's normal. They actually think the sort of mediocre experience, well, that's good. It is what it is. You have to sort of buy this, right? But it's not. With a really, truly active hobbyist game master, they will be up, sitting up, full of energy, pushing that world, pressuring you all the time, having you on an edge. But there's very few of them, and there's crap loads of the other guy. And most likely, if you're a player, you're only going to run into that majority game master who is going to run a game like that in a very lackluster way. What you see with the new school is, the new school realized they had to make a game for the majority. So even though the old games are made for the hobbyist, and they're unique, trust me, when I run them, they're fucking great. Now games have less soul, have less this, but they're made for that mediocre person running the game. That person less capable of running old school tabletop role-playing games. Actually, it's made for even the majority of people from the old school era. They like to separate themselves from the new school people, but I'm like, no, most of you are the same. There's only so many people in the old school, a very small sliver of the real old school that were the hobbyists, the deep thinkers, the active people. Very, very small portion of the old school. Most of the old school is no different than what you see in the new school. Different timeline, different likes, all that, that's true. But as far as effort, what they understood, go back to the old school. To a hobbyist, say for example, let's look at a game like Dungeons and Dragons. To a hobbyist, the idea of splitting the party, spotlighting, jumping from one group to another, no problem for a hobbyist game master. They can do that like breathing air and enjoy it. Go to the majority of guys that were DMing Dungeons and Dragons, to the majority that were less capable. Splitting up the party, that's work. Yeah, but that's what we expect from someone less capable of running the game right. To have that be a problem for them. A hobbyist is excited and passionate about running the game. They're full of energy. They never even think to talk like that. And the game was made for them. Not for the guy who's sitting there, man, I gotta split the party. I'm like, yeah, well, that's probably why you should not be running the game. That you have an issue with that. That means you're not capable in any real way, and the game wasn't made for you. Now, I don't have this nerdy ego about telling people you weren't meant for the hobby, or the way you run the game is wrong. I don't care. Whatever way you run the game, the game is the game. I don't get into this word salad bullshit with people. I don't try to call people down. I'm just a realist. Though I do get bothered when I see a game getting criticized in an unfair way, because a guy who's not capable of running it right is telling me that game sort of sucks. I'm like, the real issue is the game is fine. You suck. Look at a game like Traveller, and then you look at a game like Cyberpunk. Traveller is pretty easy to run up front, so that can be appealing to a lot of people. A lot of people like Traveller because it's actually not hard, though it still expects you to put a lot of energy to it. It's not made for the majority. It's still made for the hobbyists. They just expect you, without push, to get a lot out of it. But what if you jump to a sort of Traveller game known as Cyberpunk? Similar game, but it's going to expect you to work even harder as a game master. But it has no shame in this, because it expects you to be the deep thinker, active guy up here. It's going to put pressure on you to put scenes up where you have to have a single scene, where there could be 4 different kinds of characters, and you want the players to play the characters for who they are. See, in Traveller, you leave it to the players to play the characters for what they are. You let the players just decide that they can be lackluster or really get it right or care or have passion. But in Cyberpunk, the designer is so focused on getting players to play their characters for who they are, because the designer has it in their mind, and they're right. He's right. That by playing the characters for who they are, getting that out of players, it really helps the feel of the game. It helps bring the setting alive. So the designer expects you in 70 to 80% of the scenes to always be pressuring players with the scene itself to play the characters the way they're meant to be played. But imagine you got 4 players with 4 different characters. You as a game master have to create a scene that somehow not just gets one player to play their unique character a certain way, it has to get all 4 doing the same thing. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of thinking on the game master's end to set up scenes. It becomes so important how you set them up. Now, in 30% of the game, you can sort of go back to that Traveller sort of pace and let players play the way they want. But it's under the circumstance that you've already set a feeling, you set a tone through the other 80% or 70%. So what it does is it sort of establishes things. So in that sort of ease up area, it's not a big issue. It won't turn the game or the setting into a generic feeling place, right? But I go around and I watch all kinds of people over the years after I ran Cyberpunk try to run Cyberpunk. What did I see? None of that. They ran it like Traveller most of the time. I'd be watching a scene going, wow, you got 4 players there. They're not playing their characters for who they are, and you don't seem to even be aware that you are meant to be pressuring them to play that way. Like, I might see a game master who's more concerned with how interesting an NPC is, but I'm like watching going, yeah, but dude, the scene is supposed to get players pressured. And then I even hear the complaints, well, Cyberpunk is okay, but it can be a bit generic. I'm like, no, it's actually okay and not generic at all. Unless you do something alternative from what the designer is telling you to do. If you don't do what the designer says, yes, even he acknowledges right away, it turns into a generic setting, but that's only because you're not doing what the game intends you to do. What the designer would say is, if you do what's intended of you to do, it won't feel generic. So the generic part doesn't come from the game, it comes from the failure of the person running it. But we have a lot of egos out here, don't we? A lot of people that aren't capable, that instead of assuming they're the issue, they'll assume right away the game is the issue. It's not the game. In most cases, it's you. Now, these games expect you to be patient, to be playing for quite some time. So they're going to think that you want the experience in the feel, and that you understand you don't want repetitive anything. You don't want repetitive combat, repetitive this. So there is a sort of balance, or at least a balance over time. You might hear today, and even the majority from the old school, hey man, sessions should be balanced with combat, this and that, this and that. A hobbyist doesn't think about that balance at all. They think about balance over a number of sessions. So if they do a session or two with no combat, that's fine. Like early D&D, from levels 1 to 3, you are supposed to avoid a lot of combat as a player. So in the first 2 sessions, if there's almost like no combat, that's completely fine. And in long-term gaming, you're not breaking balance at all, right? Because you're running it the way the designer intends. And you can take it in that way because you're going to be patient and playing it for a long time. But when you get to the majority, they'll talk like you need so much action, you need so much this per session. Per session. And you can tell they have no idea what the game is, what the designer intends, and these are not patient gamers. It's even weird. Old school guys would play a little bit longer than what you see new school people do, right? But they'd still be trying to get the same amount of action, pretty consistent fighting, and everything else. But they've been doing that repetitive stuff over a lot of sessions. Like nowadays, you hear about a campaign going for like 6 sessions on average. Well, you know, that's weird. But even back in the old school with the majority, they might run a game for like 30 or 40 sessions, but the same short-term fighting and action would be the same thing with them. It's just they'd be doing a lot more of it, but not much different, right? Not much different, right? Even if they ran for a year, even if they ran to 100 sessions, it'd be a lot of action, a lot of balance, and even the modules that started getting made towards more action, more combat early. It's the people making products start realizing what customer they have. Right? They start designing things towards that customer, so you can start telling things like modules start getting away from the hobbyist. Right? That starts getting away from the hobbyist. So when I try to promote these games to you, I want you to listen to the advice I give for game mastering. It's really important. I put advice in all these fact-based streams where the advice for the old school game made for the hobbyist, I'm actually telling you how to get it right. I really am. The advice is always good. It's valuable because I'm a hobbyist. So if you want to get the feel from Bushido, follow my advice. If you want to get the proper feel from like Cyberpunk or anything, follow my advice. A lot of times I'm going into things that they're not clearly stated in the book. Right? So it's stuff you should understand from reading, but in case you won't, you can listen to my stream and I'm very direct on the language. It will help you. And then you can go back and find out why old school games are actually really, really great. Right? You got to be patient, you got to buy in, but I got to tell you, there's a feel, a soul to those games that is completely lost, not just in new games, but even in the majority. The way they go at games, even the old school majority, there is a soul to the game that gets sucked out and is completely lost. They don't understand the designers. They don't understand how to get something special out of settings, out of the game. And for many, sadly, they paint a mediocre experience as something great because many have no idea what it is to play at this level. Right? So to them, this level is fantastic. And they'll talk about it like it's up here. But I got to tell many, because I've done this to a lot of players over the years, they'll talk grand about the level down here. It's grand. They'll talk about it like it's up here. And then I'll finally run that game for them where it's up here. And right away they realize, wow, okay, what they thought was up there wasn't. Right? When I introduce them to how a hobbyist really goes at a game that's made for the old school, they understand the difference right away. So I give advice. My advice is really valuable. And I explain things in a way that isn't direct, like old school Dungeons and Dragons. When you read about encounters, it doesn't say that you should be, like it doesn't directly, exactly explain to you that you should be avoiding encounters from levels 1 to 3. But what it does is all the information it's giving you should lead you away from most encounters from levels 1 to 3. If you're a player, you should be avoiding most. Doesn't mean you can avoid all, but you should be avoiding as much as you possibly can for the sake of survival. You should be collecting your gold so you can get experience for it. Get your level worth of experience and then have enough gold to go pay for your training, to get your training for your level. It's really important. They'll talk about social interaction. Social interaction was not a big issue in old school D&D. Oh, yes, it was. If you're not doing a lot of action and you're avoiding a lot of it, especially early on, then you'll read, well, this is the way you should interact with the faction. This is the way you should negotiate with your enemy. This is the way the merchant might react to you. And they're telling you this, but what does that mean? It means you're expected, it doesn't directly say it to you, but what the game is assuming is you get it. You are supposed to talk to the people in the faction. Verbal. The reaction from the merchant. You are supposed to be talking to the merchant. Social interaction in character. You're supposed to be negotiating with the enemy, right? So you can avoid combat. Their social interaction is all over the old school game. But you'll see a lot of guys that just skip it completely. Or even from the majority, they focus so much on action, they'll be like, well, you know what, we don't really need gold to XP. I think that's stupid. And I'll be like, that's not stupid, dude. You're supposed to be avoiding the combat. I'm not saying how you play is bad or wrong. Play it however you want at the end of the day. But it's just that if I think you're getting rid of something because you don't understand what the designer intends, I just want to tell you why the gold to XP is a thing. It's because you're not expected to be trying to level up through experience from combat. You're expected to get the gold, right? That gets you experience points, and you take the gold, a lot of it, and pay for your training, for your new level. And you use leftover money for your upgraded gear and stuff like that. Now you have better gear and training. I mean, you get how it all comes together? How it works together in that way? That's the way. And when you avoid a lot of combat early on, you're not going to make up 5 characters for the game. Most of the time, it doesn't mean the game's not diddly. It doesn't mean combat, you won't be forced into combat through consequences. It doesn't mean a trap won't kill your character. Right? Death can come. It's definitely a game. It is saying. But do you got to make up 5 characters? No. And in many cases, can the first character initially survive? Yes. Now, in second edition, it will tell you to focus more on social interaction and really point you in that direction. But a lot of guys just miss the fact that if you go back as far as like OD&D and BECME, it's telling you in many ways that you're expected to talk a lot. A lot, because you're not doing a lot of combat, especially early on. So when it says how the merchant should react to you, it's because you're meant to be talking. How the faction is meant to be reacting to you, how you negotiate, is because you're meant to be talking. What about your enemy? Negotiating. Meant to be talking. What about amongst players through their characters? Meant to be talking. And go to any other old school game and try to play it without social interaction. Impossible. The games are completely built from talking to the courts, the social pressure, because you got to talk, and talk. You almost can't play any other game without talking in character and quite consistently. Look at like a game like Bushido, right? One I talked about recently. Or Gangbusters in the City. Imagine trying to play these games without talking in character. Outright impossible. Do you think old school D&D is any different? Made by wargamers that made games like Traveller and that? Things are so much more similar from one to another that you forget. And because it's not directly spelled out for certain people, they don't get it. But why? Why would you miss it? Because it was made for the hobbyist that would know it like me. See, I'm a hobbyist. So the game trusts that I will know. And it can trust me. I do understand everything I just told you early on. Why does the majority not know this stuff about old school? Why does most of the old school people, and I mean most of the YouTubers too, why do the vast majority of them don't know this about old school D&D? And they can pretend like they do. Even if they hear me talking recently and start pretending they do, go check out any past talk on this. They talk about action like it's normal. That they are as guilty of this stuff as I say, because it's the vast majority. Very few people really know this stuff, because in reality, even though it was made for hobbyists, again, very few of us actually were in the hobby to experience this. When I read D&D, old school D&D, I don't need that explained to me. I get it. But for the vast majority of people the game wasn't made for, they need their hand held. They need things explained to them. I'm not trying to insult people, nor are the designers, but they just didn't intend to be communicating to that audience. So it was a surprise to them as much as it was to everybody else, right? So then they start adjusting. Over time, the language gets better, more clear, explaining things. But in a way, it takes some of the soul out of the game. Now, I'm just covering old school this year, and I just want to tell you about the old school because I know that many people will come across the content, and I want them to take it in, understand it's unique. And I clarify things the books don't tell you directly. So I really think my streams on this are really valuable. On top of that, I give you advice about how to run the games that, again, it's not explained super clearly in the books, but if you take my advice, it is clear and direct. So then you could take my fact-based stream and you can go play Bushido the way it is meant to be ran and played. If I give you the Bushido material and you didn't hear my stream, you'd most likely have a hard time understanding the entire game or ever playing it or running it right. I'm just being real with you. So that's how valuable my streams can be on this stuff. And for designers out there, for players out there, it's an experience you're not getting with the new games. It's not just that the new games are evolved. No, it's gone backwards. It's like these games came out of the cave, the new games all went back in. So if you want to know a truly advanced experience with a tabletop role-playing game, I'm talking about an advanced experience. You have got into the de-evolution zone. You're not evolved, you step backwards. So I want to get you to the advanced area of real thinking, real playing, and real experience. And understand that, yes, action and all that is good. It doesn't mean the old games completely avoid them. It's just how it gives it to you is value, a feel, an experience, all that matters. And it's a way of teaching you how to feel a setting, how to feel a timeline, in ways that you're not getting with any of the new material. Okay, I love you. Take care.